Every horror show has a monster. From has a sheriff instead, and honestly, he's scarier to write about than anything in the woods. His name is Boyd Stevens. He carries a badge nobody gave him, in a town that isn't supposed to exist. And for 4 seasons now, the show has been running the same experiment on him over and over. Give this man an impossible choice. Watch what he does. Then give him a worse one next season. I've watched every episode twice trying to answer one question. Is Boyd the hero of this show, or is he just the character the town figured out how to hurt most efficiently? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, I think you'll see the difference between those two answers is thinner than it looks. If you're new here, this channel breaks down genre TV the way I wish someone had explained it to me the first time. Not just recaps, actual mechanics. So if that's your thing, the subscribe button is right there. Let's get into it. Before we get to the moment that defines him, we need 30 seconds on who Boyd was before the town ever touched him, because the fall only makes sense if you understand the height he fell from. Boyd and his wife Abby were both military. Abby was the kind of soldier people actually meant it when they called her tough. The show earns that nickname instead of just handing it to her. Boyd was different. He wasn't the person who ran at the fight. He was the person who made sure everybody eating dinner that night had food, that the truck showed up, that the numbers worked. Logistics. Supply lines. The unglamorous job that keeps everyone else alive long enough to be brave. There's a tiny scene early on that tells you everything. Boyd and Abby in a car, an old song on the radio, Boyd talking about buying a boat they clearly can't afford. Abby tells him so. Boyd just says they'll figure it out. That's the whole man in one exchange. He promises the good outcome and assumes the hard part will sort itself out later. Then the town takes that assumption and turns it into a weapon that, here's the scene, everything else in this show is built on top of. Abby has decided the town isn't real. She's convinced the fog, the creatures, all of it is one long nightmare. And in her mind, the only way to wake someone from a nightmare is violence. She's standing in the road with a weapon. Their son Ellis is running toward her. And when he does, she turns the gun on him instead. Boyd fires first. He kills the woman he built his whole life around, to save the boy they raised together, and the boy watches him do it. I want to slow down on why this scene matters more than a normal tragic backstory beat, because it's easy to file this under sad thing that happened to the main character and move on. That's not what the show is doing. The show is establishing a rule. Boyd now has proof, in his own hands, that when a moment arrives with no good option left, he will choose the many over the one he loves most. That's not a personality trait anymore. That's a demonstrated capability. And a demonstrated capability is exactly what a system like this town appears built to exploit. Notice something else, too. Boyd wasn't even there when it started. He was out scavenging, lost, running late, having promised both his wife and his son that he'd be back in time to talk. He wasn't. The debt he spends the rest of the show paying isn't just "I killed my wife." It's "I wasn't there, and then I was the only one who could fix what I wasn't there to prevent." That combination, guilt over absence, plus proof of capability, is the exact recipe the town keeps using on him for the next several seasons. So what does Boyd do with all of that guilt? He doesn't collapse. He turns it into infrastructure. Nobody appoints him sheriff. He appoints himself, because if he's going to owe a debt for Abby, he's going to pay it by making sure nobody else's Abby happens on his watch. Rationing, night rotations, rules. And for a while it actually works, which is the uncomfortable part of this whole arc. Boyd is good at this job. A character named Donna says something later that I think is the thesis statement for the entire show. The only thing holding the town together was faith in Boyd. Not faith that they'd get home. Faith that when the impossible moment came, somebody would make the call, and it would be him so nobody else had to. That's a much heavier job than sheriff. But here's the crack that shows up almost immediately, and it's the first sign that Boyd's rules and Boyd's instincts are on a collision course. He invents the box, an unshielded structure where a rule breaker gets left overnight, essentially a death sentence, meant purely as a deterrent. And the first time the rule is actually supposed to be enforced on a man named Frank whose mistake gets his family killed, Boyd can't do it. He tries everything to avoid sending Frank into that box. In the end, Frank walks in himself, because he has nothing left to lose. So file that away. Boyd will kill instantly to stop a death happening right in front of him. Ask him to be the cold, procedural hand of a punishment with no immediacy to it, and he falls apart. That distinction is going to matter a lot in a minute. Which brings us to Sarah, and I'd argue she's the most important relationship this show ever hands Boyd. More than his own son, in some ways. Sarah spends an early stretch of the show being manipulated by whatever runs this town into committing multiple murders, including killing her own brother. By any reasonable reading of the rule Boyd himself invented, she is exactly who the box exists for. Boyd lets her go instead. Not quietly, either. He frees her personally and takes her with him, believing she might be connected to a way out. Here's where the show gets genuinely sharp with its own protagonist. Donna calls this out to his face. This was never about finding a way home. This is Boyd trying to save the person he couldn't save the first time. He wasn't there for Abby. He's overcorrecting by protecting a killer now, because sparing her is the closest thing to a do-over he's going to get. And the cost is enormous. When another character, Kenny, learns that Boyd knew what Sarah did and protected her anyway, the trust breaks. Kenny had looked at Boyd like a father figure. He stops. That's the actual price of this mercy. Not Boyd's safety, his authority, the exact currency Donna said the town runs on. Then the show does something I think is genuinely clever from a writing standpoint. It takes Boyd's psychological weight and gives it a physical form. There's a dungeon. There's a man being kept barely alive down there, begging for the mercy of death. And again, Boyd is the one who has to be the hand that does it. When their blood mixes during the encounter, something transfers into Boyd. From that point on, he's dealing with pain, hallucinations, visions of Abby asking him to stop fighting and just come back to her. I want to be careful here, because the show never fully explains the mechanics of what exactly is inside him, and Boyd's body was already breaking down for reasons that predate this. So I'm not going to claim it's a one-to-one metaphor. But as imagery, it's hard to ignore. The guilt Boyd has been carrying silently for years gets turned into something visible, something crawling under his own skin, while he keeps functioning in front of everyone like nothing is wrong. At one point, and this is the detail that gets me every time I rewatch it, Boyd privately asks someone close to him to promise they'll end his life if he starts to lose himself the way that dungeon prisoner did. In private, nobody else in town knows the sheriff has asked to be allowed to die. The man whose entire value to this community is that he never stops standing is behind closed doors, asking for permission to stop. And then, instead of letting that thing take him, or risk passing it to his own son through a blood transfusion, Boyd walks out at night, deliberately gets a creature's attention, and forces a transfer. Cutting himself, cutting the creature, pressing the wounds together. The parasite leaves him. The creature dies. For one episode, that's the cleanest version of Boyd's entire character the show ever gives us. Not a man who defeats the horror by being stronger than it. A man who turns himself into the delivery mechanism for defeating it, and nearly dies doing it. That here's where the show pivots. And it's a smart pivot, because up until this point, every single one of Boyd's ordeals has technically been a choice. Abby, the box, Sarah, the dungeon, awful as they are, Boyd is choosing. He has agency, even when every option is bad. Then the show takes agency away entirely. Boyd gets restrained, forced to watch someone else be killed in front of him, completely unable to act. I think this is the single most important beat in his middle stretch, more important than any monster fight, because it's the first time the choice isn't offered to him at all. The outcome gets taken out of his hands, and he's made to simply witness it. That's the actual cost of everything before this point. Not that creatures keep coming back. Not that the mystery keeps deepening. It's that the town can, whenever it wants, remind Boyd that his willingness to make the hard call was never really the point. He was never actually in control. He just believed he was, and that belief was useful to everyone around him, including the show itself. And notice who steps in to absorb that. Sarah, the killer Boyd once refused to condemn, starts quietly taking on the most brutal actions herself, specifically so Boyd doesn't have to. When a captured character needs to be tortured for information, Boyd can only bring himself to go partway before he stops. Sarah finishes it. She's paying her survival forward in the only currency this show accepts. Doing the unforgivable thing, so someone else's hands stay just clean enough to keep bleeding. Which raises the real question sitting underneath this entire arc. If the town can strip Boyd's choices away whenever it wants, what is he actually for? I think the show's answer is the most interesting thing about the character. Boyd's function was never winning. It was being the person willing to decide who gets sacrificed, so nobody else has to carry that weight. That's heavier than sheriff. That's closer to a designated scapegoat who volunteered for the job. Now we get to the most recent chapter, which, quick heads up if you haven't caught up, did actually finish airing this summer. Season 4 wrapped its finale on June 28th, so unlike a lot of takes floating around online right now, we're not speculating about how this season ends anymore. We know. Here's the setup. The residents get a genuine shot at understanding the town's origin. The remains of children sacrificed generations ago, sitting in a chamber underground, reachable if someone uproots a tree that's been acting as a kind of seal. Boyd's part of the plan is simple on paper. Pull the tree, open the route, drop a ladder so two other characters, Jade and Tabitha, can retrieve what they need from below. There's a warning that comes through before this happens, telling them specifically not to touch that tree. Boyd hears it and removes the person delivering it so the plan can go ahead anyway. I want to sit on that for a second because it's the clearest possible mirror of the road with Abby. Boyd isn't a leader who fails to hear an objection. He's a leader so certain of his own read on the necessary move that he'll physically clear the person raising the alarm out of the way. And the instant he pulls that tree, the town's defenses don't just fail. They invert. Day turns briefly to night. Structures meant to hold monsters out start failing everywhere at once. Underground, Jade sacrifices himself buying time so Tabitha can escape with what they came for. When Boyd, along with two other characters, Ellis and Fatima, go down to pull them out, they run straight into creatures with no way past. Fatima ends up being the one who buys the group the seconds they need to get out, at a permanent cost to herself. Above ground, one of the town's last physical barriers gives way in the chaos Boyd's own rescue set in motion, and it costs more lives. Here's the symmetry I think is the actual thesis of the whole season, stated plainly instead of buried in subtext. Boyd's defining act, all the way back at the very beginning, was killing the person he loved to save the many. This finale is that exact same instinct scaled up to the size of an entire town. Save everyone, get the answers, get people home. And the attempt to do that is precisely what exposes everyone to more danger than they've ever faced. The man built entirely around making the hard call in order to prevent catastrophe ends up making the call that causes one. Not through malice, through the exact same trait that's defined him since episode 1. Pointed at a door he was explicitly told to leave shut. And there's a gut punch layer underneath all of it. It turns out the show's central antagonist, the figure behind the yellow suit, has effectively been inside the operation the entire season, disguised as one of the town's own residents. Which means the same night Boyd strips the town's defenses down himself trying to save everyone, the actual architect of the horror is simultaneously stripping every remaining protective object out of the town, one by one, until there's nothing left standing between the residents and whatever comes next. One of them meant to do that. That's what makes this finale land the way it does. So here's the part where I stop pulling from the show and give you what's actually confirmed. Because this matters and a lot of recap content out there is still treating Season 4 like the unanswered question. It isn't anymore. Before Season 4 even premiered, the people running this show already announced a 5th season. And they've been explicit that it's the final one. That announcement came in April. Ahead of the season we just spent the last 10 minutes breaking down. And the producers have since confirmed cast is already back in Nova Scotia starting work on it, with an expected release sometime in 2027. So the ending we've been theorizing about for years finally has a defined finish line. What's genuinely interesting is how fast they moved on it. Every previous season of this show has had a longer gap before the next one starts production. This time, cameras were rolling again within about 2 weeks of the finale airing. That's not typical for a show this scale. It tells you the people making it already know where they're going and don't need a long runway to figure it out. The creative team has also said publicly that a lot of what got set up as far back as Season 1 was always built with this specific ending in mind. Meaning threads that might have felt like background texture years ago are likely going to matter a great deal in whatever comes next. So here's my actual read, and I'll flag it clearly as a theory rather than something confirmed, because nobody outside the production has seen a script for this final season yet. Boyd has spent this entire show turning himself into the thing that absorbs the cost so other people don't have to. He's done it with grief, he's done it with a literal parasite, and he's done it again with an entire town's safety net. The show has one more season to answer the question it's been circling since episode 1. What happens when there's no one left to sacrifice except himself? I don't think that's a guaranteed ending. I think it's the shape the story has been drawing toward for 4 years. And now we finally get to see if the show intends to follow through on it or subvert it entirely. There's also an older thread worth remembering going into this. Early in the show's run, Boyd found one specific method that actually killed one of these creatures for good, turning the same infection that was breaking him down into a weapon against it. The show hasn't revisited that mechanism in a long time, but a story doesn't usually spend that much time establishing something like that, and then just leave it sitting there unused. With the town more exposed heading into its final chapter than it's ever been, I'd be surprised if that particular memory doesn't come back into play that we met Boyd promising his wife a boat they couldn't afford, telling her the money would work itself out later. For seasons on, the bill has only gotten bigger, and he's still the one it gets handed to. The show has one season left to tell us whether that ends in him finally putting something down, or in him picking up the one thing he's never once been willing to lose. If you want more breakdowns like this before the final season drops next year, subscribe, and let me know down in the comments which choice you think actually breaks him first. I'll see you in the next one.